Hey, beauties and bees. Welcome back to the show. Before we get into tonight's story, I want to take a moment to thank the person who sent this in. I read your message more than once, and this story, it really stayed with me in a way that some stories don't. Tonight's episode comes from a listener in the United States, and it follows a family who moved into an old house at the end of a quiet residential street. You know, the kind of place that looks completely ordinary at first, but where after a few days you start to notice that a room never quite warms up, that a door you closed is just open again, that the house doesn't feel as empty as it should. Okay, so we are going to talk about what happened to that family, and I'm going to tell you about something that they found in the attic. Her name was Lily. Let's get into the story. The house at the end of Main Oak Street, so I'm guessing Houston, although she didn't specify, set slightly farther back from the road than the others around it. It was a small mansion with wooden staircases, high ceilings, and large windows to let the light in. So from the outside, it looked like the kind of home a family would hope to find. It felt settled and quiet, the perfect place to raise children. The house had been empty for 10 years when the Smith family moved in, which is already a red flag, right? The people living nearby didn't speak to the family about the house in any detail. When it came up, it was usually in passing. Someone might mention that the last family hadn't stayed very long. Someone else might add that none of the families ever did. No one seemed to want to explain why, but the Smith family didn't hear any of that when they went to look at the house. They saw the long driveway, the open space, and the size of the house, a place that felt like a shot at a new beginning. According to the family, the front door opened easily, more easily than they expected for a house that had been sitting empty for a decade. The air inside was a lot cooler than it should have been. Stephen noticed it but thought nothing of it and carried the first box inside. The original owners were the Millers. They moved in as a young couple with the kind of plans people usually have for a place like that. They intended to build a life there to raise a family. But for a long time, that didn't happen. Over the years, the wife experienced several miscarriages. Each loss was something they carried quietly, without much discussion beyond the walls of their home. The space they had once felt full of possibility gradually became quieter, shaped more by absence than by anything else. Then, after 5 years, the wife became pregnant again. This time, they were blessed with a perfectly healthy baby, a girl they named Lily. By all accounts, Lily's arrival changed everything. The house, which had once felt still, came alive again. Sounds of movement, the pitter-patter of tiny feet, happy words shared. Life filled the homes in a way it hadn't before. For a while, it became the home they had always imagined it could be. But then, one afternoon, the father was bagging the car out of the driveway. He didn't realize Lily had wandered outside. The mother was in the kitchen and didn't know she was gone. By the time anyone understood what had happened, it was too late. Lily's passing affected both of them, but not in the same way. The father withdrew, spending more time away from the house, returning only when he had to. The mother stayed inside almost constantly, and over time, something about her behavior began to change. A few weeks after the accident, she brought home an antique porcelain doll from a local thrift store. It had brown hair, a blue floral dress, and a painted expression that showed a slight smile. So she named it Lily. From day one, the doll was rarely out of her sight. She carried it from room to room, spoke to it quietly, and set a place for it at the table. She stopped referring to her daughter Lily in the past tense. She began mentioning things the doll had said to her, as if were perfectly natural for a doll to converse with you. The people around her tried to understand it as grief, but over time that became harder to do. They started to visit less frequently, and eventually they stopped coming around altogether. What happened to the Millers after that is unclear. The house stood empty by by the following spring, and no one in town seemed to remember seeing them leave. What's certain is that they never took the doll with them. None of the families ever did. At some point, the doll was moved into the attic, placed inside a box with the name Lily written across the top and faint handwriting. The Smiths moved in on a cold afternoon in late autumn. Stephen and Kelly, their teenage son Jake, and their younger daughter, Emma. Emma was given the smaller bedroom at the end of the hallway, the one closest to the attic door. She set her favorite teddy bear on the shelf above her new bed and went back downstairs to help with the rest of the boxes. The evening passed the way moving days usually do. Half-unpacked rooms, misplaced belongings, dinner eaten on the kitchen floor because nothing had been set up yet. By the time everything quietened down, it was late and everyone was tired. Emma went upstairs to go to bed. When she stepped into her room, the shelf above her bed was empty. She assumed she had forgotten where she'd left her teddy bear. Then she thought of Jake. He must have taken it. She walked down the hallway and pushed open his door. The room was empty, but the bear was there, sitting in the middle of his bed. Emma picked it up and turned back toward her own room. That was when she noticed the attic door. It was open, not fully, just a few inches, enough to show the top of the staircase and the darkness beyond it. She stopped, holding the bear in both hands. She didn't remember the door being opened before. For a second, she thought she heard something, a faint shift like wood creaking under a weight. She told herself that it was nothing. She pushed the door closed and went to bed. Over the next few days, the house didn't settle the way they expected. There was a faint chill in Emma's room that didn't match the temperature of the rest of the house. Doors that had been closed would be opened the next time someone walked by. Emma started sleeping with a light on. When Kelly asked her why, she couldn't put it into words. She just felt that something wasn't right. A few nights after they moved in, Emma found the doll. There is a belief that appears in different forms across many cultures. The idea that strong emotions like grief or rage, when left unresolved, don't always disappear when the person is gone. Sometimes these emotions stay behind, bound to an object that was important to the person who left it. Whatever is inside such objects doesn't act. It influences, slowly and quietly, and almost always targeting the youngest person in the house. Emma went back to the attic door and headed up the stairs, drawn by something. Maybe curiosity, maybe something else. The space was dark and smelled heavily of old wood, mold, and dust. A single dim bulb cast a minimal amount of light over the center of the room, leaving the rest of it in shadows. There was almost nothing stored up there, just cobwebs. And on the far side of the attic, a medium-sized box set slightly apart from everything else. On the lid, written in faint and uneven handwriting, was the name Lily. Emma crouched down and opened it. Inside was a porcelain doll with brown hair brushed neatly back from its face and a blue floral dress patterned with small faded flowers. Its expression was fixed in a soft smile. Emma reached in and picked it off. That was then she noticed the resemblance. It looked just like her. The dark hair, the shape of the face, even the style of the dress. She studied it for a moment, then carried it back downstairs to her room. In the days that followed, Kelly noticed small changes in Emma. The way she had started folding her hands in her lap when she sat down. The way her eyes drifted now and then toward the hallway, as if she were seeing something no one else could. Nothing extreme, just enough to stay with her afterward. A few days later, Stephen was awakened sometime after midnight. At first, he was unsure of what had disturbed him. He lay still and listened until he heard a sound coming from the hallway. A lullaby, soft and distant, just audible enough to recognize. Simple and repetitive, but the words were unfamiliar. He got out of bed and stepped into the hallway. The air felt cooler than in the bedroom. Emma's door was open, and from the doorway he could see her sitting upright in bed, head lowered, humming quietly to herself. A doll he'd never seen before was in her arms, and she held it the way one would hold a baby. Stephen stepped into the room and said her name. Emma stopped humming and looked up at him as though she had been broken out of a trance. When he asked where the doll had come from, she told him she had found it in the attic. Her voice was calm and even. As she spoke, she adjusted the doll slightly in her arms. He asked Emma not to go back up there, tucked her in, turned off the light, and stepped into the doorway. He glanced back before closing the door. The doll's eyes were fixed on the doorway, on him. He didn't wake Kelly up. He just lay in bed, listening to the quiet of the house, worried the humming would resume. It didn't, but he didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, Kelly went to wake Emma for breakfast and stopped in the doorway. Emma was already sitting up in bed, completely still, her back straight, her eyes open but glazed over, fixed on the wall across from her. When Kelly stepped closer and touched her hand, she noticed how cold it was. Emma blinked slowly and turned to look at her. They were whispering, she said, her voice flat and soft. Down the hall from the attic. Kelly asked who she was talking about. Emma's gaze shifted briefly toward the hallway before returning to her mother, as if the question hadn't fully registered. Stephen and Kelly told themselves Emma was just affected by the stress of moving a new house and unfamiliar sounds. Explanations that made sense if you didn't think too hard about them. About an hour later, they were standing in the kitchen doorway, talking in low voices about whether to keep Emma home from school, when they both noticed something. At the base of the staircase, centered on the lowest step, sat the doll. Neither of them had seen it placed there. Kelly set her mug down carefully. "I moved it last night," she said. "I put it on the side table by the front door." Stephen glanced toward the table, then back at the stairs. Jake was still upstairs, and Emma hadn't come through the hallway. There had been no sound, no movement, nothing to suggest anyone had passed by. It was probably Jake, he said, even though as he spoke, he himself wasn't convinced. The doll wasn't just sitting there, it was looking right at them in a way that felt far too creepy and real. Kelly walked over and picked it up, placed it on the table in the hall, and didn't touch it again. Over the next few weeks, the things happening in the house became harder to dismiss. Food went missing from the pantry. Doors that had been closed would be open the next time someone passed by. The temperature in Emma's room was ice cold, no matter how high the heat was set at. At times, in the hallway near the base of the stairs, they would catch the faint scent of roses. There were no flowers in the house, nothing that could explain it. The smell would appear without warning and fade just as quickly. And after it did, the doll would have moved. It would be on a different shelf at the edge of a room near the bottom of the staircase, always placed where no one remembered leaving it. And then Jake noticed something else. Near the attic floor, faint marks had begun to appear on the floor. They looked like footprints, but they were too small. When he tried to point them out later, they were gone. One evening, Kelly asked Jake to call Emma downstairs for dinner. He went upstairs and stopped at the top. He could hear Emma's voice coming from her room, but also something else. Another voice, soft but higher pitched. He couldn't make out the words, only the rhythm of two voices in conversation, just above a whisper. Jake pressed his ear against the door, then knocked and asked Emma, who was she talking to? The voices stopped immediately. He pushed the door open and the room looked empty. But then he noticed movement inside the open closet. a piece of blue floral fabric. He called out Emma's name. She stepped out holding the doll. She told him she had been talking to Lily. Jake said there was no one else in the room. Emma didn't seem to hear him. She said that Lily had been telling her about her room. When he repeated that there was no one there, Emma just smiled. She said Lily liked to whisper when the lights were low. He took hold of her wrist and let her out. He didn't look back at the closet. He didn't speak again until they were downstairs with the lights on around them. That was the same week the final incident took place. Stephen had taken Jake and Emma into town for ice cream, leaving Kelly alone in the house. She was in Jake's room putting away laundry when she heard a sound from down the hall. At first, she thought it was the house settling, the kind of noise that had become familiar over the past few days. But then she heard it again. A loud scream coming from Emma's room. It was sharp and sudden, carrying a level of panic that didn't resemble a child playing or calling out in surprise. It sounded like fear. And Emma wasn't even home. No one was. Kelly dropped the laundry basket and rushed into the hallway. As she reached Emma's door, she grabbed the handle and pushed, but the door slammed shut before she could open it. The impact sent a shock up her arms, making her jump back. When she steadied herself and listened, everything had gone completely quiet. The screaming had stopped. There was no movement inside the room. No sound at all. For a moment, the only thing Kelly could hear was her own breathing. When Stephen and the children came home, they found her standing in a trance in the hallway, still facing the door. That night, no one in the house slept, and by the following morning, the Smith family was gone. Their next-door neighbors were the first to notice. The car was still in the driveway, parked neatly. The lights inside were still on, and the front door stood open as though someone had passed through it in a hurry. Inside, everything had been left as it was. Dishes on the drying rack, clothes hanging in the closets, a child's backpack near the stairs, untouched. And at the bottom of the front porch steps, positioned in the morning light, was the doll, upright, facing outward toward the street, with its brown hair, its blue floral dress, and the painted smile fixed in the same expression it had always held. And it was not the first time it had been found that way. It would not be the last. So, have you ever walked into a place that looked completely ordinary? A house, a room, a space that gave you no reason to feel uneasy. And yet, the moment you stepped inside, you had the sense that something was already there. Not something you could see or hear, but something you felt without being able to explain it. So, what happened in that place? I'd love to hear about it. Good night, beauties and bees, and I will see you in the next episode. Until then, bye-bye.